Thank you for having us. Go ahead, Carrie Lynn.
Hi, thank you for having us. Yes, so the Coady Institute is located on the same campus as St. FX University. We acknowledge that we do live and do our work on Mi'kmaq, and we do our best to create relationships locally with our local Mi'kmaq communities, and that's really important grounding to our work. So we're going to talk a bit about our Indigenous programming and specifically about the gathering. We've gathered Indigenous alumni over 9 years of doing this programming, and we'll first talk about what Coady does, how we build partnerships, and I guess relationships between academic institutions and Indigenous alumni, and how Coady really has a unique approach to this work. We'll talk a little bit about the gathering, some principles which are really throughout the whole presentation, and we had some really key lessons learned, and we'll just touch on our how we're going forward and how the gathering really informed that future.
So just a little bit of background about the Coady Institute, which is where we're located. Coady Institute is part of St. Francis Xavier University, based in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. And as Carrie Lynn said, we are here on Mi'kmaq and Maliseet territory, unceded and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. Coady Institute itself was created in 1959. The university's heritage goes back to the late 1800s. But in 1959, the Institute was created and named after Reverend Dr. Moses Coady, who was a founder of the Antigonish movement. That was a cooperative movement, a people's movement that was derived in the 1920s to help support the development of economic, of the communities and their economic growth, particularly in a time in the 20s when they were faced with the Depression. So really very much focused on social justice movements and economic development for communities. And since 1959, the Coady Institute has been focused on leadership education that prioritizes asset-based, community-driven development. So rather than taking a needs-based approach, which is what we often see in development work, it focuses on the assets of the community, the skills of the people, and it prioritizes the community's own knowledge and direction for determining their futures. We provide programs both globally as well as in Nova Scotia and across Canada. They're programs that promote adult education and innovation and group action. And we have a particular focus on women, Indigenous communities, and youth, and historically underrepresented groups. And that really is part of the premise for this discussion today, the work that we are doing on Indigenous communities. So at the next slide, really, we talk a little bit about our Indigenous programming and how it started. Since the beginning of Coady, which is now 61 years ago, we've often had Indigenous community members, Indigenous participants in our education programs, such as our Diploma in Development Leadership. And on the slide that you see on your screen is an indication of some of the early graduates, some of the better known graduates that we've had coming through the Coady doors, whether it's Bill Erasmus, who's now an honorary national chief of the Dene Nation for Life, or it's the past commissioner of Nunavut, and Mikujik Hansen, Chief Terry Paul from our own area, who's been the chief of Membertou First Nation for now 35 years, and the father of Wab Canoe, Thomas Kanquat Canoe, was also a graduate of our programs. So a long history of support and working with Indigenous participants in our education programs, as well as in terms of our community engagement through the St. FX Extension Department. So next slide. What I wanted to just say here is that in 2010, 2011, that's when we made a decision that we really wanted to go deeper and focus in on supporting Indigenous women in their leadership journeys, and in particular in helping their communities prioritize the development agenda for themselves. The project of the Indigenous Women Community Leadership Program was in large part derived by the then director of Coady Institute, now Senator Mary Coyle, as well as Dr. Marie Delorme, who's a well-known Métis businesswoman living in Calgary, and our major partners at the time, Imperial Foundation and ExxonMobil, as well as the Donner Canadian Foundation and a number of individual supporters. But it was really Imperial and Exxon in the early days that helped us create this program that that was quite unique for its time in 2010. There were very few leadership programs that were specifically for First Nations, Métis, or Inuit women across Canada. There was certainly very little focus in an academic institute at the time in that area as well. But we had an understanding and a recognition of the importance of promoting and supporting women leaders, not just Indigenous women, but women globally, through our Center for Women's Leadership. And so this program was created. So over to you, Carrie Lynn.
Try unmuting. So in our IWCL program, we call it IWCL, it's really a bridge between those leadership concepts and skills and the combination of them bringing their own practical experience to the tables. And they come to our campus for about 3 weeks, and then they go away for 3 months and do a community development project, which is very much based in the asset-based community-driven development approach. And we do our best to really keep our content relevant, including things like the TRC and UNDRIP, social movements like I Don't Know More, Indigenous Lives Matter. Those things are all central in our focus in our content. Staying relevant to the most Indigenous focused content in the moment is really important to us. We also have a continuing recognition of the program needs to be Indigenous led, nothing for us without us. So it's so important, even as this program is housed in a non-Indigenous academic institution, it's so important that it is Indigenous led. Eileen, did you want to add to that?
No, I'll go right into the next and I can go there. Yeah, so I mean, what Carrie Lynn was talking about at the end really is quite important to us, not just in the Indigenous work, but across Coady. It really a recognition that that our programs are built by having shared values and shared approaches, in ensuring that we're valuing the expertise, the lived experiences, and the knowledge that that our participants have when they come into our courses, and recognizing what each person and what also their communities bring to the relationship. And it's never more. It's so important in a program like the Indigenous Women and Community Leadership Program that we're thinking carefully about where the women are, where they're located. And the context around them not just in terms of their own leadership, but in terms of what the challenges and the opportunities that their communities are facing. What we want to make sure we're doing is that we're not just offering a course, but that we're building something that's sustainable, and sustainable in particular for themselves as women leaders, but also in terms of supporting their communities, and ensuring that there's reciprocity, that we understand what we are gaining from having Indigenous learners in our programs, but understanding also what we're helping to share with them and demonstrating the value that we have for them. It's our intention always in our work to think about how we can build longer term relationships. And as I mentioned earlier, ensuring that the work that we do on the program, like the IWCL program, is ensuring that it's Indigenous led and Indigenous driven. And finally, there's a key part of the work that we do, especially in our women's leadership programming, where we have one-on-one mentorship built into the work. And that's quite critical because the participants then have an opportunity not just to learn and to explore and to share amongst each other in a classroom setting, but they also have an opportunity to hear from other Indigenous women leaders exactly the kinds of experiences they've had in their careers. And they have that extra layer of support and modeling to take their work forward.
I wanted to just add too, you know, these principles and values are really lived, and part of how I got to Coady was I first came as a participant in 2011 in the IWCL program, and really got engaged in the asset-based community-driven development that really piqued my interest, and just using some of those tools in my own community made me want to do more and learn more. And they asked me back as a facilitator for a few years, and then as a mentor, and then I joined the Coady as a teaching staff in 2018. So, you know, these are, what?
We enticed you back.
Yeah. So I value that they kind of put their mouth or money where their mouth is. You know, they're making space for us graduates and Indigenous women, especially, to be leading in these programs. Did you want to say anything else on the last slide, Eileen?
No, thanks.
Okay.
I think some of this slide, you know, really builds on what we just said in terms of those, you know, the idea of having longer term partnerships and sharing leadership, and ensuring that we're also valuing leadership that's coming from the graduate network. Constantly looking to build capacity and wherever we can to hire from within alumni where we can. So CCAeLearning, you're a great example of that. And, you know, our colleague, Andrea Curley, is another good example. But even amongst associates and amongst mentors, continuously looking at how do we help to elevate our graduates, not as leaders, of course, already in their own right in their communities, but also leader educators. So that continual circle backwards. Those are some of the things that I think are critical. And then, you know, we've had some ongoing opportunities for learning that you've been able to take part of as well as other graduates, CCAeLearning.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the picture. So the top picture is of two of our graduates who were able to go to South Africa and attend the MBIZO, which is an ABCD global conference. And they were able to present their ways of using the asset-based approaches from an Indigenous perspective. You'll see on the bottom, we had the opportunity for 5 of us to attend the CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women in New York City in 2018, early 2018. And yeah, these were both huge learning opportunities for us, and to have Coady reinvest in their graduates and build our capacity, I think has been invaluable. Attracting Indigenous people to Coady. For me, I know this from working with Indigenous people over the last 2 decades. You know, relationship is always first. Having good relationships with people is so important, especially when you're attempting to attract Indigenous people to your institutions. And always knowing that for us, the word of mouth, I don't know how many of our graduates, very high number though, have referred their friends or people that they know or people that they meet to our programs. And that's really, we get about 100 or more applications every year, and we can only take 15 to 20 participants. But this is why. It's because they're coming and they're having good experiences, and then they're telling people. So that's absolutely number one to attracting Indigenous folks. We often we have to go where the energy is. We have to go where the women are that we're trying to attract, or the Indigenous people are. And for us, it's that social media or those social networks. And oftentimes it's Facebook or LinkedIn, or those are places where even our online programming that's taking place right now, they tell us, I saw this on Facebook, or a friend sent me this email. So really getting around, or getting to figure out where they're at, and how to speak to them in a way that they are excited to come to the programming. Again, keeping that content current and relevant to their life and their work. It's as much about the content as it is about building relationships, though. Giving that time and space for them to connect is really important. And I think as well, our focus has really been on a holistic programming, and that's maybe a bit different than maybe a true strictly academic institution. We address all the components of the learner, the mental, the emotional, physical, and spiritual. So we have ceremony when it's appropriate, and incorporated into our program. We start with a smudge ceremony. We draw on the assets of every individual that comes into the program. We ask them to think about their experiences and really bring those to the table to help others learn as well. And we really try to see them as a whole person, and how do we address that in our programming.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Carrie Lynn, that you mentioned at the end, because when we started the Indigenous Women and Community Leadership Program back in 2010, we had our first cohort in 2011. The whole idea of the program initially was to support women's leadership in economic development for their communities. And yet what we really realized was that when women were coming to the program, they needed to take a step back and look at other priorities that were on their minds as well, things that were affecting them, that were contributing to their well-being and their own health, and their level of readiness to really take on bigger leadership roles, particularly around socioeconomic development. So this concept that we had around community economic development, very much from a non-Indigenous perspective, had to be set aside, and that holistic approach that Carrie Lynn talks about became the priority, which didn't mean that we didn't go get back to the key issues around how do we help communities move forward economically, socially, in terms of governance structures, but it had to be done in a way in which all pieces were captured. So in terms of the IWCL itself, we reached a point in 2019 where we had now 9 cohorts. So our next slide has a bit of data on it, which is difficult to read if you're looking at this on your Zoom, but all I wanted to show you here was the spread of graduates that we've had from coast to coast to coast. We have a total of 147 graduates as of 2019. We would have had another cohort this year. However, we had to set it aside for now while we're addressing the COVID and adapt our programming in a different way. We've had a median range in our program of around 35 to 36 as the median age. It's predominantly been First Nations women that have been attending, but a strong showing also of Métis women, and a smaller number of Inuit grads. And this is, I think, a reflection also of challenges, but also opportunities, or challenges that women have in terms of leaving their communities, but also the opportunities that we created with the program by reducing some of the restrictions, such as the funding of the program, giving additional funding for childcare and so on. So really working to try to navigate, but also recognizing that for some women, it's very difficult to think about traveling all the way to the East Coast and leaving family and community behind, even for a very short time. We've had a high number of graduates from Alberta, which is not surprising given the funding that we've had, but also we did receive funding from the government of Alberta in 2014 and going into 2015, which also helped to spike up the numbers. And then in 2018, we were able to do a pilot program, which I think was quite exciting, hosted by Enoch Cree First Nation. And what that allowed us to do was to bring our program to the region, to Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8 territories, as well as for the Métis Nations, and expand in a different way. And that turned out to be highly successful and is now driving some of the thinking we have about the work that we do moving forward. And in terms of graduates, I think that 147 is roughly represents a 94% completion rate in our program. So 94% can be quite unheard of in some academic institutions, so where Indigenous students are concerned. But I think this again speaks to the nature of the program, the way in which it was designed, and the opportunities or the reduction in barriers that we were able to provide given the funding we had. And what's really interesting to see is that these women are continuing to be strong leaders and move forward in their communities, as well as on national scale, really being influencers, global influencers. And they're also going on to further their own education. So we've seen a high number of our graduates now go into post-secondary studies at the master's or PhD level, or even just at the bachelor's level. They found some comfort in a hybrid organization like Coady Institute at St. FX, than to make these bigger leaps into the fields of their choice and other post-secondary institutions as well. So that I think is quite exciting and is a direct result of the programming that we've been able to do so far.
I just wanted to add that, you know, having the opportunity to bring my son with me, I was a new mom when I attended the program, and bring my mom with me to care for him was, you know, made all the difference, and really endeared me, I think, to Coady to make those accommodations, because I honestly wouldn't have been able to come. You know, after leaving the IWCL program, I was able to enter into politics. I got elected on a municipal council. I was also moved into a directorship of education on a First Nation. It really opened a lot of doors for me. So, you know, thinking about how we can, you know, make it better, easier for Indigenous people coming to our institutions, and yeah, I think that's important.
Right, so then that takes us into the whole idea of thinking about Indigenous alumni. And, you know, again, this is, you know, repeating from earlier points in our conversation today. Again, thinking about the recognition of assets. So thinking about if you're in an institution across Canada and you're focused in on alumni engagement, then what's interesting for me to think about is, or with you, is whether or not you're starting to consider the shifting demographic that will be happening in your universities as you're trying to reach out and include more Indigenous learners on your campus. What does that mean then for when they graduate and the demographic of your alumni? And, you know, a good example is St. FX. St. Francis Xavier University has a very strong alumni base, very proud alumni, and they're very engaged with the university. So as the university is moving forward, what is the nature in which they engage with Indigenous alumni? To me, this is something that's quite important that we think through. You know, really, what are the opportunities of recognizing what they bring to the table in terms of informing the university's programming moving forward, and how is it that we can also continue to support and engage them as they're back out in their communities and moving forward as leaders. So that idea of reciprocity. And this is something that's for us at Coady quite important, because again, as I've mentioned earlier, it's not just about taking a course and then leaving. We really do want to build a longer term relationship with our graduates to the extent that it's wanted. And so how can we do that better? And this leads us into thinking about some of the ways in which we've engaged our alumni, and then into the gathering. So Carrie Lynn, maybe you can share a little bit about what we're doing concretely right now.
Yeah, definitely. I think part of why we're able to engage Indigenous alumni is because we're doing some things right. And I think part of that is the mentors. You know, when we match Indigenous women with mentors who are longtime leaders in their own rights, it's often a long-term relationship. It's not, you know, it's not just usually for those 3 months that they're together. Many of them, you know, years later, it's 10 years later, I still talk to my mentor. There's still those lasting relationships. How many times I've heard other women in the program say, you know, I still talk to my mentor at least a few times a month. You know, it's so important, those really concrete things of, like, you know, writing reference letters, supporting, I just supported a woman to run for chief in her community, you know, connecting them with other alumni who are maybe doing some of the same works or training opportunities or any kind of opportunities for them going forward. One of kind of the unintended things that has happened over the program is that many of our cohorts have made Facebook pages that they even 10 years later are still communicating regularly and supporting each other through that network. And so while we encourage that, it's really them that kind of put it together and then continue the work on. But certainly that's been a real strength. Also, you know, having them knowing that there is a long and ongoing relationship, that we're not just asking them to come to the program and then go away and do their work and live their life. Oftentimes, you know, we're invested in their success, you know, whether that means writing a reference for school, getting into graduate programs or PhD programs, all of those stuff, that is something that we encourage and we do fulfill as best we can with the resources we have. Again, when we go into these short courses that are more local, across the country, we've done one pilot project in Enoch, and we hired within our alumni to be a co-facilitator in that offering. But that has always been our intention to do as we go forward, is to have alumni lead in partnerships with their communities or in projects or in courses. They are the experts. They know their area. They know the cultural protocol and context. And it's really important to have them lead that work, and we come in to support them. I look at it as like we're always working ourselves out of a job. If we can build a capacity and leave and there's still good things happening, then that's what we need to do. Yeah, and again, those I can't stress enough. You know, we just had an e-conference that was global, and we had a panel with Indigenous women, 5 Indigenous women on it, everywhere from, you know, a mentor who's close to being an elder to one of our interns, female Indigenous interns at Coady. So really giving them a chance to have their voices and stories heard is so relevant. You know, some of the things that we're doing concretely to keep in touch with our alumni is we're starting a newsletter for them. We hope to have it out quarterly. We're just working on the first one now. There's a upcoming project about how Indigenous women are leading in their communities through COVID, and what are the stories around that. We're looking at collecting those, but also we've through our work over the last 10 years, been able to create something that is called an Indigenous asset-based community-driven development. And right now we're offering those e-courses on that topic, but it wouldn't go, we couldn't do that unless we had all the stories from all the women over the last decade. And now we're in the process of wanting to put those success stories together in some kind of publication. The the gathering itself really was at the request of many of our graduates. You know, for years and years they've been asking, you know, when can we get together? Because what happens is they're in silos. They don't actually know the other cohorts unless they have friends or acquaintances or in those other cohorts. So they really wanted an opportunity to bridge with the other cohorts. And what was especially interesting was that the short course that we had in Enoch, we had 20 women in that course, 19 women in that course, and almost all of them actually came to the alumni gathering. And you'll hear from one of the participants later on in a video we have to show. But I think what was great about this is we intentionally tried to apply an asset-based approach. So we, you know, there was an alumni planning committee who really consulted with our alumni about what the content should be. We tried as best we could to use their gifts and talents in putting this together. There was certainly a strength in sisterhoods in, you know, between the cohorts, but this was a space to be able to create that feeling of sisterhood across the cohorts, which was so important. And, you know, I think what we're just kind of starting to see is really those bigger collaborations between communities and, you know, nationally across. You know, I just had a call the other week from a participant in 2018, and she was asking me, can you recommend graduates from the program for some speaking opportunities she has coming up? So I'm starting to see where this connecting is paying off. And it was really for us a real re-energizing of the asset-based approach. And many women would come to the program and they would see the value in an asset-based approach, and they might do their projects and learn a little bit from that, but they really didn't feel grounded in it. So, you know, re-energizing their interest in that and wanting to take that their knowledge further and learn more tools was a really key part of that. And it really gave us an opportunity to think about direction. Where do we want to go in the future? Did you have anything else there, Eileen?
Yeah, I'll build on that onto the next slide, Carrie Lynn. I would say that in a way, this whole gathering, you know, as you said, we were seeing a demand for it coming from the graduates, but it was also a moment, I think, of insanity on our parts. You know, it's a lot of work to organize a gathering, let alone organize a gathering in rural Nova Scotia. We're 2 hours away from, you know, the main airport of Halifax, just to give you a sense if you don't know the area of the East Coast very well. And here we were talking about bringing all these women together and doing it again in a way where the opportunity was created for them without creating an additional financial burden. So we really worked hard at ensuring that we had the funds available to do this kind of gathering, and to do it as a homecoming, really, which, you know, in the traditional sense of homecomings, you can imagine the return to the university, to your alma mater, and to connect and to collaborate and rekindle relationships with your cohorts. But in this case, you know, looking to really connect all of the cohorts together. So it was a lot of work, and I'm not gonna mince words around that. I think we could not have done it without having somebody like Andrea Curley, who was another graduate of our program, and who we brought on as the coordinator. And she was phenomenal in terms of managing every day with a smile all of the logistical elements, no matter how complicated they got, and ensuring that we kept the true to the vision of engaging as many of the alumni as possible in every part of the decision making. And again, Indigenous women across the country are not all the same. There is a lot of diversity. It really is global. And so, meeting the needs and the aspirations of all of the women, as well as all the mentors who have been involved in the program, is quite a big feat. In terms of some of the events that we had during the actual gathering, we had a whole range of things, such as a speaker's corner for interviews. We had certain memorials, especially for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We had plenary discussions. We advanced some of the topics that they had been already familiar with when they first took the program, including not just women's leadership, but then also the area of asset-based community development that Carrie Lynn talked about. We had a marketplace, which then was a way to also engage the community itself around the university. Indigenous marketplace, because so many of our graduates are also entrepreneurs and businesswomen, and they had a lot to share and to offer. And that turned out to be a huge success. And again, really engaged the community. We also really spent the time ensuring that we were celebrating and honoring the territory that we were on by bringing together, Mi'kmaq entertainers, of engaging our local Mi'kmaq communities, and ensuring that we were inviting Mi'kmaq elders and guests especially to the opening events. And again, that's really important to us given where we are located. And included in that also was a field trip to Buckankek, which is the neighboring First Nation community. And the picture that you see on your screen, actually, the young woman sitting down in the blue sweater is Elder Mary Lafford, otherwise known as Hubba, and she's been with our program since the very beginning, and is just has been just such an honor and a joy to work with all of these years. So a range of things that have happened. And Carrie Lynn, was there anything that I missed that we covered? There was so much that we did. Yeah, I mean, in terms of lessons learned, which we've kind of outlined a little bit here. I'll name a couple from my perspective that I think are important learnings for all of us. First of all, less is more. That sounds so obvious, but we tried to do a lot with the gathering, and we recognized that the more you try to do, then you really do spread yourself. So thinking a little bit about how we could have maybe pared down on maybe fewer issues or fewer events as part of the gathering would have been a good thing to do. At the same time, though, because this was a shared endeavor, it didn't, in many ways it felt like we could take on more because there were so many different graduates bringing different things to the table and also allowing their leadership to shine. We definitely engaged all the mentors and the alumni. We have an ongoing relationship now because of that. In terms of the gathering itself, one thing that I learned in this process was also needing to make sure that we're clear with funders and partners, especially longstanding funders and partners, on the expectations around the gathering. So thinking through the fundraising, and some of our funders really pushed us to be creative in looking at corporate sponsorship, which for an advancement team in a university probably sounds like a logical thing to do. For an institute and an educational institute, and for me as a program director, it pushed me into new territory. So the value of working really closely with our advancement team in the university, can't stress that enough. It's really, really critical. And giving yourself the lead time to do the proper fundraising if you are looking for corporate sponsorship. So that was very new for me and for my colleagues. At the same time, we have existing funders. And so, and they've been contributing for a long time into our programs, such as Imperial. So where are they located in the gathering? How can we make sure that they have a chance to both experience, what their support has been able to do for us, whilst also making sure at the same time that the gathering is true to the principles of alumni-led and alumni-driven, or alumni prioritized. So managing those relationships with our funders and ensuring that we have a common set of expectations on what's going to happen is important. And then finally, of course, logistical. There's just no question that logistics, there's always something, just like a wedding, there will always be something that can go wrong. And definitely we had lots of glitches, but I think also I've found that the participants of our gathering were definitely willing to overlook those logistical glitches because of the richness of what the experience was bringing for them. So yeah, so some hard decisions on what we should do and where we should do the gathering and what the purpose of it was, but overall quite an exciting experience that's now led to, you know, some new forward thinking as we've got the next 10 years of programming, I hope, ahead of us in terms of the Circle of Abundance. And Carrie Lynn, do you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to stress how important those relationships are. You know, this opportunity to partner with Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively would not have come about unless we had really good relationships with our mentors and those long-term relationships. So being able to you know, sustain those and bring not just, you know, our staff together with our partners and our funders, but actually bring a 12 graduates and mentors from the program together in a circle of abundance. And we now go to them to give us some guidance around how we should engage alumni and how we deliver our programming and the content of our programming. So I think we're also, you know, moving into this direction of letting them lead and contribute to our work. And I think, you know, I said to Eileen, you know, 12 minds are better than one at any day of the week. So having, you know, also reinvesting in them, but also having that reciprocity of them also giving back and contributing to our program.
Yeah, so the Circle of Abundance campaign really, for those that are not familiar, is you know, a combination of it's a fundraising campaign that we launched at the beginning of June or in middle of June, and it was precipitated by a gift that was given to us by Ryan Reynolds and his wife Blake Lively. But it doesn't stop there. We actually have raised almost $1 million now towards our programming moving forward. And as Carrie Lynn said, in large part, that's because we're doing this together with meaningful intention on building relationships, with being guided by the women in our graduate circle and our mentorship circle moving forward. So, you know, our direction for programming is quite exciting, and will very much build on the legacy of the work that we've been able to do, but also help take us in a new direction, fitting for the times, especially looking at expanding regionally and building within community various partnerships. And some of the funding that we've been provided will allow us to do that moving forward.
So we wanted you to also hear from one of our graduates, alumni, and cue it up here.
I'm not hearing it. I'm not hearing it.
You're not hearing it?
Mm-mm. No. Might be a volume issue.
Sorry?
It could be volume on your side, maybe. Sure.
Not sure if you want to try to unshare and then share again, Carrie Lynn. There might be check that box.
And while Carrie Lynn is getting that set up, maybe I'll just go to the last slide, Carrie Lynn, and just talk to that for a second, just to say what's the future from going on from here. You know, we're going to be, as I just mentioned, working to strengthen our educational programs, again in consultation with our graduates, getting our programs even further out into communities in the way that we've always intended. Not just having our programs on campus, but really being able to be visible across the country in various communities where we're being invited to be. Listening and learning and being responsive to Indigenous women leaders, not just here in Canada across Turtle Island, but also looking at how do we connect Indigenous women from this country to women all around the world, and what can we expand on. And then, of course, right now, we, of course, are in the middle of a pandemic, and we are finding with that, there's new opportunities that have been created for online learning. And while that doesn't always give you the same kind of feeling as you would have where you're together in person and you're able to really engage in a space conducive for women's leadership, but it's also creating new opportunities for women who otherwise would not be able to participate, who already have busy lives but want to continue their learning journeys. And so I think we're seeing quite a large response to the online work that we do. So I'll turn back to you, Carrie Lynn, for that video.
My name is Hope
There you go.
Nation in Northern Alberta. I am an alumni of the Enoch program in Alberta. The Indigenous Women in Community Leadership program affected me quite profoundly. I find for myself, and I've found for other women that I've spoken to here at the gathering, that it's been a catalyst for change, and it's been a grounding exercise at the same experience at the same time. I took the program at a time where I was at a crossroads and a place where I needed to make decisions for direction in my life. I come here and am grateful for this program to constantly remind me that I belong among women leaders. It impacted me in that it reminded me to ask myself who I am and what my values are, and to use that as the measurement or the compass for where I go in my life. What has my experience been like at the gathering? It's like I've never been here. I've never been to the East Coast. I've never even been to St. FX, but it feels like coming home. We were fortunate enough to take our program on Enoch territory in Alberta, and we found home among each other there. And coming here, it feels like being reunited with a larger group, a larger sisterhood that we didn't get to necessarily experience there, but we're told about. And now it feels like, whoa, you get to see the bigger picture, and that we were a part of something that felt big to us, and we knew and understood that was something big and important, but being here really brings it home and makes it real. I think that we come to these gatherings and, it's hard to know what you need, and sometimes the gathering of the women itself really tells you, you are where you should be, and you're among your people. We're all doing our best to lift women and our communities up. We're all doing that in some way. And I feel like being a part of this program is a direct line into creating agents of change. And I'm super proud to have the opportunity to be here. I'm super deeply grateful. I would wish this for every single one of the Indigenous women that I know, to be here, to be a part of it. I hope that wherever I go and whatever I do, that I somehow get to lift other people up with me. And I hope to create sustainable First Nations.
Great. So thank you so much, everybody. I think now